Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm David Bowles, and today we travel back to 1982, when I was a sophomore in high school. The boy who wrote it down. In 1982, a 16-year-old boy in the Midwest sat down and wrote 8 episodes of a television series about teenagers running a school newspaper. The characters drank in darkrooms, they brought guns to school, they had bone cancer and absent fathers and substance abuse problems that no adult in the building knew how to address. One of them wore orange overalls and ordered a razor from a magazine that promised to scrape away the dead sensuality, uncovering your natural animal instincts. The blades cost $79.88. The razor cost $3.87. That detail is the kind of thing only a teenager would write, because only a teenager understands the specific economics of being cheated by the adult world before you are old enough to know the word for it. That boy was me. And for over 4 decades, those scripts sat in a drawer and then in a file and then in the particular purgatory of work that matters to its author but has not yet found its form. Today, I want to talk about what happens when you go back. There is a speech in the first episode of the original series. A character named Aries Taylor, 15 years old, sharp as a surgical instrument and twice as dangerous to himself, tells his friends about a beach. Not a real beach, a metaphorical one. He says that life is a beach where everyone gets a grain of sand in an open wound, and the soap is never strong enough to clean it out, and you just have to keep walking on the sand, knowing that every step might be the one that puts another grain in another cut. It is not a hopeful speech. It is not a despairing one either. It is a teenager telling the truth about what he has already figured out at 15, which is that the world will hurt you and the hurt will not stop, and the only question that matters is whether you keep walking. I wrote that speech when I was 16. I did not know at 16 that I was writing about something real. I thought I was being clever. I thought the metaphor was a good metaphor because it sounded like something a smart kid would say, and I was a smart kid and I wanted Aries to be smarter. What I did not understand, what I could not have understood, was that the speech was not a metaphor at all. It was a diagnosis. The question I want to raise today is not a literary question, though it will involve literature. It is a question about time and authorship, and the strange loyalty we owe to the things we made when we were young. When a 16-year-old writes something true, and the man he becomes reads it 44 years later and recognizes it as true, who is the author? The boy who wrote it without knowing what it meant, or the man who finally understands it? Let me tell you what the boy wrote. He wrote a series called The Westborough Crusaders, set at a fictional Midwestern high school where a group of teenagers published a newspaper called the Crusaders under the supervision of a journalism teacher named Mr. Jace Canterbilly. Canterbilly ate donuts, lectured about the prostitution of the English language, and kept a grandfather clock from Switzerland in his house that stopped ticking every time he fell asleep. He was engaged to a woman named Nancy who did not exist because the questions from colleagues had become unbearable and a fictional fiancé was cheaper than an honest answer. The central friendship was between Aries, the one who wrote everything, and Crewley Smith, a transfer student from Florida, who arrived on the first day in orange overalls, a green shirt, and red sunglasses, announcing within minutes that he had uncovered a teacher who was a member of the KGB, sentenced for 6 years, almost treason. Aries matched the energy immediately. He had an uncle who took 6 years to write a sentence. He was a judge. That exchange, that moment where two 14-year-olds discover they are funny in the same way and at the same speed, is the engine of the entire series. Everything that follows, the drinking, the gun, the bone cancer, the hospital, the departure, the brown envelope left behind, all of it runs on the fuel of that first recognition between two boys who found each other in a journalism room and decided, without ever saying so, that they were going to survive high school together. But the boy who wrote those scripts also wrote things he could not have fully processed at 16. He wrote a character named Stan Harrison, who slid from social drinking to dependency with the quiet ordinariness of weather changing. He wrote a mother who told her bullied son not to take it anymore and did not ask what he planned to do about it. And the gap between what she meant and what he heard became a gun in a hallway. He wrote a character whose older brother had bone cancer that was hereditary through the mother's side, which meant the character himself was carrying the same disease in his own bones and did not know it yet, or knew it and could not say it, which is worse. These are not the concerns of a boy writing television. These are the concerns of someone who had already been paying attention to the way adults fail and the way teenagers build shelters out of whatever is left. For 44 years, those 8 episodes existed as a compressed dramatic architecture. They began in the middle of things with relationships already formed and wounds already festering. And they ended with a boy on a bus to a cancer hospital and his best friend holding an unopened brown envelope containing the last column the boy would write for the school paper. Everything before the first episode and everything after the last was implied. The implication was so rich that the novels were already there, waiting inside the silences. The Westborough Crusaders is now a trilogy. Book 1 is called The Year Before the Wire. It traces the academic year before the series begins, following these characters as they become the people the audience will meet in Episode 1. Aries quits football. Stan starts drinking. A boy named Bergie Bergman transfers to Westborough, hoping for a fresh start, and discovers that the predators at the new school are worse than the ones he left. Canterbilly winds his clock in an empty house and reads a student file that frightens him because the writing in it is too good for a 14-year-old, which means the kid is either going to become a writer or be destroyed by the thing that makes him one. And Puck Taylor, Aries' older brother, begins having headaches that will eventually receive a name nobody in the family is prepared to hear. The central question of Book 1 is this: what do you have to lose before you become the person you are going to be? Book 2 is called A Farewell to Shins. That title is a comic riff on Hemingway, filtered through a teenager's bone cancer, and it is the name of the last column Aries writes for the Krugerrand before he leaves for the hospital in Minnesota. The novel takes the 8 original episodes and expands them from compressed television into full novelistic interiority. Where the scripts could only show what characters said and did, the novel goes inside their heads. When Stan drinks cherry vodka in the darkroom, you are inside Stan's body, feeling what the alcohol does to a nervous system that has come to need it. When Bergie brings the gun to school, you have already spent an entire book watching the accumulation of abuse that produced the decision. And the gun is not a surprise. It is an inevitability that the adults in the building should have seen coming and did not, because they were not paying attention, because they never pay attention, because institutions designed to protect young people will eventually fail, every single one of them. The central question of Book 2 is, how do you keep writing the truth when the truth is that everything you love is falling apart? Book 3 is called The Stopped Clock. Canterbilly's grandfather clock, the one from Switzerland, stops ticking when Canterbilly leaves Westborough. The school's administrator, a man named Double Wee, who has spent the entire series crumpling the Krugerrand and throwing it at his wastebasket, goes to Canterbilly's empty house, finds the clock stopped at 11:30 in the morning, and winds it. He winds it every day at lunch for the 7 months Canterbilly is gone. That image, the bureaucrat who fought the newspaper maintaining the teacher's clock in his absence, is the moral center of the final book. Book 3 follows the consequences. Aries in the Minnesota hospital, where his roommate turns out to be Jace Canterbilly, recovering from open heart surgery. They communicate through the wall by knocking. 1 knock means I am here. 2 knocks means I am scared. 3 knocks means tell me a joke. Canterbilly knocks 3 times. Aries tells a joke. It is not funny. 3 more knocks. Back in Westborough, Crew runs the paper alone for the first time and discovers that his editorial voice is not a scalpel like Aries, but a hammer. And the hammer is what the paper needs. Stan goes to real rehab, the kind without epiphanies. The kind where you have bad days and worse days and occasionally a day that is merely terrible. Julie changes her perfume, which sounds like nothing but is everything, because it is the smallest possible act of a young woman deciding she is not defined by the boy who used to love her. The central question of Book 3 is, what survives? I want to be precise about what these books are doing, because it matters. The humor in these books is character-driven, never ironic distance. Aries and Crew are funny because they are intelligent and observant and terrified, and humor is the only tool they have for surviving a world that keeps proving itself unworthy of their trust. The shift from comedy to devastation happens without warning, often within a single scene, and you should never feel the gears change. Aries delivers the grain of sand speech in the same conversation where he mocks Crew's razor. Stan sends anonymous roses to the girl he still loves in the same episode where he gets force-fed whiskey by the people he thought were his friends. The tonal model is early Salinger crossed with the domestic chaos of a John Hughes script that nobody sanitized for the studio. And the thematic argument, the one that runs through all 3 books and does not soften or resolve, is this. Every institution designed to protect young people will eventually fail them. And the only reliable shelter is the one teenagers build for themselves out of loyalty, humor, and the refusal to look away from each other's wounds. That is not a comfortable argument. It does not lend itself to inspirational posters or commencement addresses. But it is true, and I knew it was true when I was 16, even if I did not have the vocabulary to articulate it. The vocabulary came later. The truth came first. There is a temptation when you revisit old work to improve it, to sand off the rough edges, to make the characters say things the author now knows instead of things the characters would actually say. I refused that temptation. The 16-year-old who wrote these scripts understood something about adolescence that the 60-year-old must not be allowed to correct. That being young is not a stage you pass through, but a wound you carry. And the wound does not heal. And the scar tissue is who you are. The trilogy preserves the original material's refusal to protect the reader. Nobody delivers a speech that solves the problem. The adults do not arrive with wisdom the teenagers could not have figured out themselves. The gun goes off, the whiskey gets poured, the cancer is hereditary. And the ending, the last image of the last chapter of the last book, is a grandfather clock ticking in a house where a teacher has returned from the hospital and a student has returned from treatment, and neither of them is the same person they were before. And the clock ticks because somebody chose to wind it. And choosing to wind it is the only thing any of us can do. When I was 16, I wrote Aries Taylor as the boy I wanted to be. Someone who could see everything and name it and survive the naming. 44 years later, I understand that what I was actually writing was the boy I was, which is a different and more frightening thing. The grain of sand was already in the wound. The speech was already a diagnosis. The only difference between the boy and the man is that the man finally wrote it down as a novel in 3 volumes, with the care and the structure and the time that the boy could not have managed, because the boy was too busy surviving the beach to describe it properly. The Westborough Crusaders trilogy, The Year Before the Wire, A Farewell to Shins, and The Stopped Clock is published by David Bowles Books, here in New York City. These are the books the boy started and the man finished, and they are the truest things I have written because they were true before I knew what true was. The clock is ticking. Somebody wound it. That is all any story needs. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a memorable evening and a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Be a human meme.